us to wait, or? These are nice. Well, geez,
my
Pete, I'm
masters.
just
Can
gonna
we
just
go?
sit here and nod. This
No,
is
no.
great.
But
That's
this
all
is
I brought. No, it's
for posterity. For those of you I don't know very well, I'm Mary Canty, and I'm Assistant Director with Lori Hudak of MCAT. And tonight is the first of a 4-part workshop series that we're holding for MCAT producers and the public at large to come and ask whatever questions they might have about productions. In a couple weeks, we'll have the Producers Showcase Series, which is a bunch of programs producers here have put together, and it's a chance for us to look at each other's work and kind of ask questions about that and see how our own work is progressing. Tonight, the topic is organizing your production and production review. And what I was thinking here was that we probably have had folks come through training and maybe even work on some of their own productions, but they're running into questions that they have about their productions, or they're ready to take the next step and they're interested to find out what that might be. So when I thought about people who'd worked on a wide range of productions, I thought of these folks here. The first person I'll introduce is Bruce Whitey. Down at the end, Bruce and I had the pleasure of working together through MQTV. Bruce and Lori and I are working on a production called The Wolf, Real or Imagined. That's before my job here. Now Bruce and Lori are carrying on with that. And Bruce impressed me as someone who wrote a script, trusted his script, and followed his script. And I thought that would be valuable advice for us here this evening. I've also worked with Pete Talbot, who's formerly with Sterling Productions and now with Productions West out of Billings. And he's their Montana Missoula stringer or Missoula producer. And liaison. Oh, excuse me, dear. And Pete has operated his own business for, I think, more than a dozen years now. Basically worked as an independent producer on commercial and non-commercial productions, on a whole range of productions. Hi, Virginia. So I asked him to come and give you his pearls of wisdom that he's gleaned from years and years of hard work. Lori Hudak and I work here together as assistant directors of MCAT, and I thought that it might be helpful for you to have someone here as an MCAT resource, but also she is working on her own independent productions outside of MCAT and has a wide range of technical experience and has a degree in film and television. Something fairly unusual among us producers, actually a degree in film and television. Although I think Pete's probably got one too.
A master of television.
The
That's
format,
right.
That's right, a mistress. No, don't. The format for this evening is I'm going to ask I asked each of these folks to speak for 10 or 15 minutes, very briefly, about some of their experiences in production and some of their experiences working through MCAT, and then we're going to open it up, and it's just going to be a question and answer period. So I hope that you brought some of your questions. I'm going to ask each of these speakers if you could address your question to one of them initially. I'm going to ask them to repeat the question into the microphone because this is a single camera production this evening, so we need to share this microphone and get the question on air. So thank you for coming, and we'll start with Bruce here.
Okay, I'm talking about writing from a script. And here's the things that I wanted to go over with you, okay? Brainstorming, because I really want to impress on you the importance of that. I don't have a lot to say about research, because you should know that you should research your subject. And then getting into the script itself and like how to set up a script. We'll go from there. Let's start with brainstorming. Now, I mean, do you guys know what I'm talking about when I say brainstorming? And you don't know. And what I really mean by brainstorming is have fun with it. Okay, don't just sit there and, I mean, let your mind go. Really, the problem I think all too often in the creative process is people get into the production mode, being productive. I know where I want to go. I'm headed here, and so then this brainstorming process sort of gets left in the dust as far as the value that it can have in being a creative process. If you just really let it go, you're going to you may come up with some better ideas than you already had to begin with. So, okay, what do you do in your brainstorm? Some of it can just be, you just as simple as, well, let's not make it as broad as wolves, but let's say, in my case, working on this production had to do with the wolf in myth and folklore. Okay, so now we've got it kind of compartmentalized a little bit, and just sit back. I mean, do it in the bathtub, do it wherever you're comfortable. Just let your mind go and start writing down what's there. Okay, Red Riding Hood. And I've seen it. I was hoping that we could have like a blackboard to do this so you can see, but I've seen a couple different ways of doing it. One is just writing the word, and this is real linear, but writing the word and everything that comes into your mind. Another process that I saw was where a person popped the central idea right here and then went up and wrote the Little Red Riding Hood, and then everything that came off of that, and it's like all of a sudden, oh, Little Red Riding Hood, sexual tale. Puts that over there, and so now this thing's like going all over the place, right? But later on you can come back and you can look and see where ideas connect, and you can scratch out what you don't want. Let's see more about brainstorming.
Process for the film that you're working on, the one with the wolves.
How
You share a little bit more of that brainstorming of how that worked for you.
a better one on the wolf than the best one really is, because sometimes I'm negligent on doing this, and then when I do it, I'll all of a sudden realize, why don't you listen to your own advice? Because one, you have fun, and two, it really advances the project. And I was teaching a class over at the university to technical writers and in the Force Service, okay? And it's like these people are really not given many strokes for being creative. And so they just are real linear, and they're just ready to do their research and then, pump out a report or a term paper or whatever. So I was trying to get them, I gave a big pep talk on creativity, and we did some exercises and all this. Well, at the same time, I was working on a play, a script for a play, and at that time, I didn't even know what I wanted, what I was going to be doing exactly. So I decided to take my advice and just play around in my head, brainstorm. So I did. I actually got into the bathtub, got a real hot bath, turned off the lights, just sunk down till I was about this far. And lo and behold, the story that emerged was about a submarine. and all these things just started flooding into my head, and I wouldn't stop them either. That's the other thing. Don't stop something. Then I watched. This is where you get in trouble with a group. There's always somebody who goes, well, that's not a very practical idea. We can have a spaceship in the movie. And so, boosh, then everybody just stops and they start thinking practicality. Well, blow that aside, because you can come back and start scratching all your practical stuff. Just play and have fun, and if you're writing this, just let it go. A lot of times when I'm writing ideas, I may just carry on for about a page, and then later on come back, and I'm not using it just like I wrote it there, but I may use like a quarter of it, and to me that's quite a bit. I mean, because this brainstorming thing, when I'm going to talk in terms of writing. When I do it for writing, a good comparison is a painter doing, say watercolor sketches or pencil sketches. A lot of times they're just playing, but they're playing with composition, they're playing with contrast and all that. And then from that then comes the final piece that they're going to, paint up there for you to look at visually. Well, the same thing with words. And when I'm saying, the words, I'm not just meaning the pure on script, but also, visually the words that will visually jog you into knowing the images that you need. Okay, it's like, say you want a picture of the sunrise, but there's a whole range of sunrise pictures you can have out of there. I mean, really start getting specific now. What is the sunrise I could have? And what is the music that could go with that? And what are sound effects that might go with that? All these things, you can just be jotting these things down. You can be, to me, it's like I'm running a motion picture in my head, is what I'm doing. It's almost like I, pop the video in there, and it's just playing. So just let it go. To me, that can be the most fun part of it, because there aren't any parameters at all. Okay. Yeah, well, I have a little note here as far as treatment. That could be the next stage you go to, and I already mentioned it some, but I mean, it's your visual treatment. You keep that in mind with your script. There's your oral, your narrative, that treatment. That's the actual script. The visual is what you're seeing. The musical part of it, the musical treatment, what are you going to have in there for music? Same thing with sound effects. Now, when you come to the script, sometimes I feel like I'm just either stating the obvious or overlooking the obvious because it seems so obvious, but you just write it. and this is based on your research. Things that I think are really important in that whole, in the writing world and also in the video world. I mean, there's what's called the hook. You want to get that viewer's, that reader's attention, right? And so you give them a first line, you give them a first scene, you give them something that makes them want to go a little bit deeper. And I don't know about you, if you've ever started to read an article and you go, I just want to see what this is kind of about. Now, I'm going to be up off the toilet in a couple minutes anyway, so I'll come back and read it tonight. And then you just keep reading and reading and reading, because this writer is so good that they managed to hold your interest through there. The same thing, you want to do that visually. And, one that graphically comes to mind was when I first saw, Star Wars. Here comes this little spaceship, and then a big spaceship. It was like, whoa, if they're doing that, what's going to come next? And then, in comes Darth Vader. So they had my attention right from the word go, and they didn't drop it, through the whole piece. Okay, anyway, do that. Hook your reader's attention. Try to make your transitions flow. In other words, you're talking about apples and you want to get to oranges, instead of just, you might mention that they're both fruit, and that at least makes or another fruit is the orange. So you got some sort of transition, so you're not just jumping unless you really want to do that. And then, as far as physically how you set up a script, Lori brought along this great example. It's a 2-column thing. And this is something, if you got a word processor, it's really keen, because you can first work on it, on your script, just like it was a real essay or whatever, and write it out. And then after you got that pretty well honed down, you indent it way over so that it's only taking up half the page, and that leaves your other half of the page, print that off, that leaves the other half of your page so that you can come back and start writing in these images, okay? And I'm working on one right now that I went a step even farther, and I got 3 columns. And the other one is the music or sound effects, okay? And this is when you're really starting to fine-tune this thing, because what you want to do is go out there and shoot, and you want to know almost exactly what it is that you need to shoot. Okay, let's see. Okay, well, let's go back to that first initial. As you're writing the script, and you're going along, and if you think of something, you pop it in there again, like the sound effect. I was just doing some little pieces for a guy, and we'd go, here'd be a line, and then it would say, sound effects. It was great, too. He was indicating music. He says, now, if you know what music you want to indicate, write it in there. And I said, well, I know a sound or a mood I want to have, but I really don't know pieces of music that well. Well, he acted a little disappointed, and then later on he showed me one of his pieces, and when he would indicate music, he would go, New Age geologic theme. Okay. I mean, if you got musicians who know how to do something like that, then, that. But at least that gives you a mood, and then stream and birds and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, what I'm going to rely on is having some questions to answer. But the one other little bit of good, solid advice I give you is if you're working with a group or you have to have a committee review your script. I'm working on a piece on wolf identification right now, and there's all these biologists who need to review the script. What I do, is I write my nice little polite cover letter that says, your input would really be appreciated. But because they're notorious for not getting it back on time, I put, however, it would be of no value, or, we will no longer be able to use it after such and such a date, that's realistic. And then you figure that they're going to be a week later than that. So, but have this time, a deadline that you can have this. For one thing, you do want to have their input, but for another, that way they can't, climb all over you because you didn't take their advice if they didn't turn in a script. You've given them their chance, and they didn't take it. The other thing is I would have a sign-off deal there. It's like if you are doing this for some group and the committee needs to review the script and they said this is okay, I would make them sign off, have each committee member sign off on there. And that way, if later on, after you've gone to the trouble of shooting it and you've gone into post-production and you're now making your dubs, and some committee member says, oh, I don't like that way you use that word there. It just makes me uncomfortable. Then you just, look, you signed off here. And, it doesn't mean they can't give you more trouble, but at least they look a little foolish doing it. That's what I had to say. Should we just go on down the line and come back to questions? How do you guys want to work it? This is yours. Yeah.
Well, I guess following along on that, it seems actually a pretty good transition, as you were talking about earlier, is the storyboard. And this is a really elaborate storyboard put together by an art director. I put them together too when I don't have an art director at my disposal, and I have little stick figures and suns with happy faces on them and rays coming off of them and things like that. But it just, for me, it really helps me visualize what's going to happen in the piece I'm doing. If it's a 30-second commercial, I might have every frame storyboarded. If it's an hour-long documentary, well, you'd be spending weeks and weeks doing all the little storyboard figures. So maybe you just want to take key scenes or just transition scenes and put a board, put your scene in there, put your little pictures in there to give you an idea of what's going to happen for a while. And then the next big transition, put another one in. But maybe it's just the way I think. But I really like to have those pictures in front of me and go, okay, well, this one is an interior shot, next is an exterior shot. I know what kind of equipment I'm going to need to produce it. And I'll pass this around. This will give you an idea. Right now, I don't have any. Usually you have your script, narration or whatever going on under here in the white boxes. And then you can also, if you have any special music effects or anything like that, you can put those in there too. I think they were still kind of hammering out the script when they did this storyboard here. But
Do you also put your pans and tilts and things like that in there? Is that important to you when you're
yeah, you can do that. You can go all the way through, dolly shots, anything. You can get as elaborate as you want. And I suppose the more elaborate, the less chance of you forgetting to do something or forgetting to have a particular piece of gear on hand. You recognize that artwork there.
Is that yours, Ryan?
Competition.
After that, here's a couple other sheets I have. These are the master sheets, but I have an equipment list. And this is broken down, since I shoot both film and tape, mostly tape, just because that's what the market will bear these days. I just have most of the equipment that I'll need on the shoot. So after I've got the storyboard and I've got a date when I'm going to start shooting, I get the equipment list and I go through and I make sure that I've got batteries for the camera, that I've got the tripod, that I've got little things like plugs. You go to some place to shoot and your Lowell lights that you get here are a 3-prong, a grounded. And this is an old house that just has the 2 prong outlets. Well, you can go to any hardware store and for 29 cents pick up the little 3-to-2 adapters. They're great to have. Just things like that, and all those little things. I'm just going to hand this one around too, just to give you an idea. If you've got talent involved, it's good to have something to give to them so they know what time to show up, when to be there, what to wear, and that sort of thing. So this is a pretty elaborate crew call. You certainly don't have to get this elaborate, but it's nice to have a little card that gives the time when you want the talent to be there, the location, what they should wear, any extra props and that sort of thing. So here's the call sheet on that. You can hand this one around too. This is one I've never used. This is
Oh, good, let's show everybody.
well, it's because it's really elaborate, but it'll give you an idea how they do it in the really big leagues. This is how they put their budgets together, and they've got a line item and a number for everything from insurance, electrical equipment, wardrobe maintenance, artwork, teleprompters, everything in the world. But it's kind of interesting to see what they do in the big leagues. The nursery, here's one for the nursery, so. That's about it. I also just have a little schedule here. This is probably for my own ad, so I know, as I'm not supposed to be shooting 2 things on one day or something like that. And that's how I get ready for a shoot. I've got a little ditty bag here, which I brought. Maybe we'll dig around in it later.
Show 'em what you got.
These are nice to have on a shoot, a pair of leather gloves if you're working with lights at all, because those babies get hot. And if you want to move them or anything else, just a pair of leather gloves, you grab it and you move it around. Otherwise, you've either got to power it down, let it cool off, or burn your hands. So, just things like that. This is fancy. This is basically fancy aluminum foil. It's black aluminum foil. And you use it for lights. If you're using lights and you've got some spill, some light coming off of the light that you don't want, you just wrap this around the head of it and focus the beam a little bit more. But heavy-duty Reynolds wrap will work just as well. This just looks better on the set. I got tons of other things, but we can get into that later. Things like clothespins for actually pinning the aluminum foil onto the lights. What other things? Lens tissue, lens cleaning fluid, adapters. Just when I think I've got every adapter in the world, I'll go on a shoot and find out that I don't. And so it's something you just acquire over the years, whether it be a mini plug adapter to a big 1/4-inch phono adapter, or an RCA to BNC. These are all the little different kinds of adapters that come in and out of decks and cameras. And I'm sure if you're in the business long enough, you'll get a nice little bag full of adapters too. Maybe eventually you'll have them all, but I've been doing it for a dozen years now, and there's always one that I don't seem to have.
And there's nothing more frustrating than getting over there and not being able to use something because you don't have the right connector or something.
So maybe the thing to do is the night before the shoot, if you've got the luxury of getting the equipment, or the morning before the shoot, is taking everything out and looking at it and saying, okay, well, this plugs into here, this plugs into here. Do I have the right adapters? Tape. Do I have all the tape I'm going to need? Do I have microphones? Do I have the cable that goes from the microphone to the camera? It's real nice. And usually here at MCAT, they check equipment in and out. But, it can get hectic here, and it's always a good idea before you're down the bidder route getting ready to shoot, to open up that bag and look and make sure you got everything you're going to need for the shoot, because once you're down there, you're going to have a hard time in Darby finding a 3/4-inch cassette, or a light, or a microphone cable, or something like that. That's all I can think of right now.
Okay. What I wanted to go over basically was more of post-production, or pre-production for I shouldn't say a regular person, I'm a regular person. These guys are more professional. For a MCAT volunteer, okay, so I want to go through step by step what I feel is real important to get your production ready to go. I feel that there's 90% of the work that you need to do before you start shooting is on paper. It takes, well, it's taken Bruce and I 2 years.
Yeah, a lot of it is grant writing.
2 years, yes, to write our grants, to get all our copyright permissions together and put everything down on paper and get everything ready that way before we actually went out and shot and started editing. So that's some of the stuff I want to go over right now very quickly. And then, like the rest of them, I just assume take some questions, whatever I haven't covered. The first thing that you want to do before you start actually shooting and before you actually start doing your paperwork, and we can help you out with this too, we actually do have some forms to help you think a little bit, is what do you want your production to be about? What kind of audience do you want to target? What kind of format do you want? All these things you think are pretty trivial, but they're all very important of how your end result's going to turn out. And if you don't have these things in mind to begin with, the farther along that you get, the more mixed up you're going to get because you're not focused on any one particular audience or any one particular format or purpose. A purpose is real important too. And if that's not fixed in your mind, you might as well just forget it right there. You have to think about, again, what format you're going to use. Is it going to be a live program? Is it going to be a documentary? Is it going to be in a news format? That's, you know, a magazine-style interview. Is it going to be a music video? That's real important. That all gives your feel to the audience or what the audience is going to get from your piece. Obviously, video is a very visual medium, so however you put that together is how your audience is going to see you as a producer. I think that's very important. You have to figure out what shots you want to get for this particular piece and how are you going to get them. If you want, in my case, as I passed around, I'm doing a video piece on least terns and piping plovers in Montana. They're two very rare birds that we're putting a video together for an endangered species educational program in the schools. But they gave me this assignment and they said, go out and find these shots. If the birds, there's only 24 birds nesting pairs in Montana, where do you find these shots? And so I've been working on this piece since, last summer, and I've had an awful time. I don't think I would have done that if I hadn't asked to do it, because I thought that it was too hard for me being in the situation I'm in to get the shot. So that's something you've got to think about. If you've got this great idea for video and you can't get any shots for it, well, then it's not going to do you any good at all. So that's something that you have to think about very early on. That's important. Of course, you've got to do your, like Bruce mentioned, you've got to do your research. You've got to make sure all your facts are correct before you do anything else. You've got to get any copyright permissions, or in my case, I'm using a lot of, and Bruce, on our film, we're using a lot of storybook pictures, illustrations, museum pieces. Administrative nightmare. If you've got to do that, give yourself several months to take care of that, if not longer. 2 years. You've got to get permission to shoot individuals, or you've got to get permission to shoot on location. If you're going to go on private land, for example, you've got to get permission to do that if you need a particular shot. That takes some time. You've got to figure out what kind of lighting you're going to use, some of the more technical things, where you're going to get your power source. Little odds and ends like that, if you don't think of very early on, it could ruin your whole production. What kind of props you're going to need, what kind of graphics are you going to need, titles, things like that. That's all real important. And a real simple thing that not too many people think about is how many cameras are you going to use. A one camera setup is pretty easy. Okay, you point and shoot and you get what you need. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. If you're going to use a 2 camera setup, your production might be done a little bit differently. You've basically, I'm kind of jumping a little bit, but you basically have one camera shooting the whole scene, more or less, getting all of the action. Then you have another camera getting your cutaways, which we'll talk about here soon. So that could affect how your production goes as well. Then you've got to, once you've got all that taken care of, then you've got to start making a shot list. Okay, well, you've got all this stuff in mind of where you're going to get your shots. Everything's taken care of as far as copyright and everything. You get a piece of paper and you write down, okay, shot one. And it's the same as a storyboard. And Roman had mentioned earlier that instead of a storyboard actually putting his shots down in a sequence, he puts them on 3x5 cards. So you shot one, it's going to be of a tree. I'm going to pan right or I'm going to pan left. And whatever other notes that you need to help yourself with that particular shot. Shot number 2, 3, 4, and so on. You can do that on the cards, you can do that on the storyboard. And that really does help get you thinking of how your video is going to look in the end. I really like the idea of the cards because then, more than the storyboard, I've never used cards, but then you could start juggling them around a little bit. If you figure out, oh, this shot's not going to work near this one, you know how we all do it. You never stick by what you originally think. You can sort of shuffle those around a little bit.
Well, then too, don't, Roman, if you like go.
And drop
You
them
can
on the
actually
floor
see
and
Actually, I but not on the floor.
yeah, yeah,
So
that's
because
I
it was a
yeah.
very ambitious
a good idea.
project, and for me to actually follow it, you couldn't draw a storyboard tradition like we do in advertising,
Mhm.
with 30-second commercials. I mean, I'd literally cover a whole living room floor
And then
with
move
these
them
little
and-
cards,
Mhm.
and I'd visualize as I'd be looking from left to right how this thing would flow. And the
Mhm.
advantage of that is that I could make those changes and move things around, and
Right.
take them back to the original position.
Right.
I'd number them so that if I wanted to go back to square one,
Mhm.
I'd still have my original storyboard.
Mhm.
But I was moving things around and changing, and using that creative license until
Right.
the very last,
Yeah, I really like that idea. That would be a little bit more versatile. I suppose nowadays you can do that on a computer too, some of these new setups.
Oh, God, it's so
Um,
much nicer than I would think that to physically hold on.
Well,
to a
sure,
card.
but I mean somebody that really was into computers, I'm sure there's programs out there for something like that. And then from something like that, after you've got that together and you've got it organized into what you want your video to look like, more or less, with some minor changes later, then you want to make another shot list of how you're actually going to go out and get those shots. Okay, for example, if we've got all shots 1 and shot 35 and shot 64 and shot 15, they're all going to be shot in this one location. You take a piece of paper, and this really helps me out a lot, especially with my timing and when I'm going to go out and shoot and so forth. Okay, at the library, I'm going to get shots number 1, the tree. I'm going to get shots number 2, books on a shelf. Okay, so you actually taking those shots apart again, putting into units that you can actually work with. Okay, does that make sense? Then you're going to go back and edit them into your final program. And that really does help a lot, like I says, to actually organize those into how you're going to get those shots and when and where. And then, of course, you always want to shoot with editing in mind, too. And that's where your storyboard or your cards really help. And that's why I asked Pete earlier whether on his storyboards he puts down his actual camera movements, whether he's going to pan right or he's going to zoom in or zoom out. Because if you don't have that in mind, when you go down to edit, if you've got 2 shots together and all of a sudden both of them are doing the same movement, which is not a bad idea, but it just doesn't seem to work in that sequence, and you don't have that on your videotape because you hadn't thought of that before, you've got to spend extra time to go back out and do that. So always shoot with the editing in mind. Same with the cutaways. If you're doing interviews, for example, interviews you don't want just talking heads on a whole 30-minute piece because people tend to yawn off. So you want to think about what cutaways you're going to put in there. And if the person is talking about agriculture, and all of a sudden he says, okay, well, this is, we're talking about bugs on a potato beetles. Go out and get a shot of a potato beetle. So you want to think about that so you can insert that in later on. But that, again, the importance of a storyboard of the cards really helps you think about that a whole lot. And I know a lot of people that go through the MCAT productions don't do storyboards. And I know Roman does, but he's one of the few. And it really does help a lot, and it cuts your editing time down. It just makes things a lot easier when you actually go in there. You know exactly what you're doing. The same thing with framing and compositions too. You want to think about that while you're out shooting, because you don't want 2 or 3 shots in a sequence together that are all, I don't know, very extreme close-ups, which could work in some situations but not in all. So that's very important to think about that. You want to make sure when you're shooting too, talking about editing, that you have enough slack time at the beginning of each shot and at the end of each shot. Same with the beginning of your tape. And we tell you that in our basic orientation, but inevitably I always have somebody running out of the editing room saying, how come I can't get this first shot edited off my tape? Because they hadn't gone into their tape far enough, or they're cutting their interview right off at the very last word and not getting enough time at the end. So just a little thing right there that you need to remember when you're out shooting. Then, of course, like Bruce mentioned, you do want to think about your narrative a little bit and do the 2-column deal. And that really helps me out a lot. Helps me think about where my narrative is going and what shots, and then I can visually think about that along with my storyboard. And then it helps too when you're actually cutting your narrative. If you have a person other than yourself going to read that, they can actually see what type of visuals they're talking about. And then let's see, what else? That pretty much organizes everything. Once you get everything done on paper, then you can go out and start shooting because you've got your storyboard there and or your cards and your narrative. So you know exactly what you want, and then you can go in and sit down and edit. Once you get all that shot, please log your tapes too. That's something a lot of people don't do. So you're not quite ready to edit. Actually, I jumped the gun there. So when you get done shooting, sit down for a half a day or however long it takes and log your tapes. So you know each tape, you know exactly what is on that tape and where to find it. And that really helps too when it cuts down your editing time.
You can go and then you can write the numbers. If you got an extra storyboard, you can write your numbers
Right.
in.
Right.
First
Do you want
scene.
to go in there without logging?
Oh, a lot. I would say 80% of the people go in there without logging their tapes. At least what I've seen.
Productivity, you know, you should probably get a.
Well, they do a lot of
4
searching.
times
Yeah.
savings on your
Yeah, a lot of
active
searching.
one.
So the way that you do that, just for your information, now you just zero out your tape at the very beginning, and without resetting your counter, you just go in. Shot 1 is at 30 seconds in, it's a tree. Shot 2 is at 45 seconds in, 3 frames or whatever your clock says. It's a picture of a boy. You know. And it takes some time, but boy, it helps when you're searching for that stuff out.
You could put it on fast forward.
Sure. Oh, yeah. Right. Yeah. If not, you're going to do what everybody else does in there. It's the 80% of the people that don't log their tape is, okay, which tape's it on? You know, they've got a box of tapes here and can't find the shot that they want. So I usually just log them out and stick the piece of paper right in the wrap of each tape, and then I've got it there. So that helps.
One thing I wanted to add to that, I think for me it was really helpful to go into a lot of detail as far as the logging too. I found myself initially doing, like you were saying, just general kind of explanations of what that particular scene was.
Yeah.
And then later on, when I started doing the rough cut, I
You
really
forget.
wanted to just
Is
find
that
out,
a
okay, this
zoom? Is that a
person
pan?
had a little bit of
Right.
that.
Yeah.
So the more you can actually put into the detailed description while you're logging, the better in the long run.
And it does take some time, especially with interviews. I found the same thing with interviews. I shot some interviews 1 month, and then I went back 2 months later, and I didn't detail as much as I did. I put keywords. I thought, well, gosh, I'll remember that. But then I went back and I thought, you know, fields, what the heck did I mean by fields? You know, and then I had to sit back down and go over everything. So yeah, it does help to really detail out. But it's up to each individual how good your memory is. And mine is obviously very poor.
And another thing that'll help you there too, because as you're watching this, I mean, you can be doing this to a degree at while you're watching a tape. I mean, you should be watching what you shot, and you're going to see scenes you just know that's the one you want. I mean, so toss in there, you know, great, need in this section. I mean, in the Wolf ID one, I have a section of talking about comparing a coyote to a wolf. Well, on the shoot that Laurie and I went out and did, where these captive animals were, this coyote looks up between the legs of this wolf. Well, geez, I mean, this is almost like tailor-made. You know, it's like it was a wind-up coyote who did exactly what we needed to do. You know, if you want a good comparison size-wise, there it was. So, and then as soon as I saw that, I just put in size comparison in. You know.
Well, you should know exactly by that point, if you had done your organizing properly, exactly what you're looking for anyways. You know, well, everything's going to change as you go on. You're always going to change ideas, but you should have a good idea of what you need. But yeah, there's a lot of shots that you get and you really have no idea what you're going to do with. The situation arose that the shot is just really great, so you grabbed it. And then it turns out that could be the best section in your video. You add that in later. So don't lose shots just because you didn't have them down in your storyboard. Grab them and log them in. You always have them for future use if you don't use them. And don't be afraid to overshoot a little bit. I mean, don't do what my mom does, never turn off her camera, but don't be afraid to overshoot, because then once you get into the editing room, you're going to wish you had that shot, or you wish you'd had it longer. And I know when I first started out, I wasn't setting my shots long enough. If I was getting a still shot of a field and I thought it was only 20 seconds, I thought I needed 30 seconds long, and it turned out it was only 10 seconds. The shot, and then I went in to edit, that shot wasn't there. It wasn't long enough, so make sure that you've got enough of each shot too. You can always cut it down, but you can't add on to it. I think it's very important. And I find that a lot. I hear a lot of people screaming in the editing room.
I got one quick comment, because it's kind of a pet peeve of mine. And you said that it's a very visual medium, and that's true. But I think lots of times people are more concerned with the visuals and they forget the audio. And
That's
there's
a good
nothing,
point.
I think there's nothing that pegs an amateur production quicker than crummy audio. Usually the microphones they have on camcorders and cameras are not that high a quality. Some of them are, if it's a high-end camera, they'll be pretty good. But if you want good, clean audio, don't be using that microphone on the camera to collect
Right.
it. You have lavalier microphones here, don't you?
Mhm.
Lavalier
Yeah.
mics are the little ones that clip on here. If you're doing an interview, that's the one to use. Get that mic right up next to them, so you get good, clean audio. Really, even in local television production that I see here, the first thing that pegs a bad spot for me is usually the audio. When the car salesman sounds like he's talking in a cave, well, that's because they didn't mic him right, and it jumps out at you. I think sometimes it jumps out at you more than crummy visuals do, is lousy audio. So keep that in mind when you're shooting the visuals. If the sound is an important part of it, whether it be the narration, if it be an interview, or whatever, take the time to set a microphone in the right place up close to get it. Either a lavalier or a directional microphone or something like that. Don't rely on the camcorder mic to gather all your audio, because it's going to sound crummy when you get into post-production.
Yeah, that's a real good point. Thanks.
And really a good rule of thumb there is to take twice as much sound as you think you're going to need. I mean, if you got the interview that's going on outside, then later, if there's a stream running over there, like Pete says, don't rely on just the ambient sound to take that. Go over there and mic the stream for a while, and you can lay that on there.
Always lay that in.
A couple comments more that I got going, and then I got wound up after I heard you guys talking and realized. Okay, on the writing, I want to really make the point how important I think writing is, because this is such a visual medium, people don't give writing enough credibility, and so one of the things that drives me nuts is there's this one film that's, when Lori and I have taught other workshops, we use it. It's a great example. Because the cinematography is just like out of this world, and there's good music. Some is better than others, but it's good. They obviously put a lot of time into this music. But the narration, the narrator is Spock. It's Leonard Nimoy. His heart isn't in this, so he's just being ever so dramatic. And then second of all, they have him saying stupid things, okay? And one of the things with writing is you write actively, okay? And it may not seem important to do that when you got a camera rolling, but it is important. Use active words. And what I'm talking about, active verbs, what I'm talking about here is you could say, he walked outside. Well, that's pretty active. It was hot. Was being a pretty passive verb. It was hot. Well, okay, so it was hot. I mean, you could say he wiped the sweat from his brow. Well, right there, in that, instead of saying it was hot and saying he wiped the sweat from his brow, you've told the audience a number of things. You've told them it's hot. You've actually showed them it's hot. You've indicated that he has a brow. And then you've also indicated that when it's sweaty, he wipes it, okay? So a lot more information comes through when you write actively. And even though you're going to be showing it up there on the screen, the other thing you do is you show, don't tell. And this comes into this, what I was working up to with the film, this Ocean Symphony, was, I can't remember the exact example, but it was like, these seals are under the ice. Well, I'm looking at the screen and it's like, tell me something I don't know. Maybe if the picture had gone out, that would be valuable. But there's these seals under the ice. So, it's like, why don't you say seals can hold their breath for 20 minutes under the ice? Well, that's something the picture can't tell me, right? And at the same time, so, you're blending, you're getting as much strength out of your narrative as possible. And time after time you see people just thinking because they have a picture going that they can just have this really weak narrative. And the other thing I want to say about audience, because it's so easy to dismiss that, it's like, well, yeah, I know I should have a purpose. Don't treat me like I'm stupid. And I know I need to be, writing to an audience, and so a lot of times, and I do this on the little MCAT forms, it says, what's your audience? Like, general audience. Well, who's that? Is that a bunch of military people? Anyway, what I do when I'm writing, and I really want to, pick out an audience, I think of a friend. I would explain something to my mom, say some environmental thing. I would explain an environmental topic different to my mom than I would to Lori. And I would talk about climbing, rock climbing, different to Pete than I would say to my climbing partner. Okay, so if you can picture somebody in that audience, suddenly you now have a personal attachment, and it really helps me in my writing. I go so far as to write, Dear Jeff, because there's a tone I use with this friend or with, my mom. And it's so easy later to go back and then scratch that off your script or suck it off the screen. So that's...
I hardly ever write. I let Bruce do it.
I don't do much writing either.
Let's open it up for questions. If anybody has any.
I've got a question. How can you actually estimate the cost of a project that's taken you 2 years and still meet your budget or your,
How do you the question here is, how do you estimate the cost of a project that's take 2 years? You work for about 13 cents an hour.
Yeah. Literally.
And, you really would, one of the things that I'm doing personally in this thing is I'm banking on the fact that this will give me some credibility to make fundraising a little easier in the future. I want this thing to look just so slick that when I go to finish the series off, people with the money or with the funding will go, oh, well, yeah, you guys know what you're doing. So here's the money you need to do the next one.
Does that answer your question, or are you wondering how we came up with the budget beforehand, knowing that it was going to take us so long?
well,
I'm not sure.
I don't know how the rest of the folks what kind of experience they've had, but that's always been a real puzzle, and I think Pete can empathize with that too. You start off with a project, and you think this is going to be your involvement, and then you find
I
yourself
see.
going into your second year,
I see.
or like I started this project with MCAT in July, and I estimated it was going to be done in October. It wasn't
Oh,
until a couple of
geez.
weeks ago, the first part of January, that it was actually completed. And like you said, you find yourself actually working instead of what you projected to be mega bucks per hour to working for about $1.25 an hour.
No, it's not even
if you're
that.
lucky.
We figured
You
we'd
know.
get about a penny a day for what we've been doing.
Well, that also makes it really important to, if you
To
just,
live.
the other thing that got in the way was making money. You know, we had to, you know, like write.
Details.
Yeah, I know. I've written a book since then. I mean, this whole project got shelved for about 4 months while I wrote a book, so I could be making some money, and these things got in the way. But it is important too, I think, to pick a project that you're interested in. You know, that that unless you really know you can make money at it, and to support what it is that you really want to be, you know, making films about. Pick something that is important enough to you that you're not then feeling resentful of the amount of time that you're investing in it.
And if that's all you have to do, too, all of us are in the situation where we have to work other jobs. We can't do productions all the time. I think if we did it full-time, we would have been,
Yeah, well,
we
we'd
would
be
have done
done.
it 2 years ago.
And
But-
part of it too is we'd have had a bigger budget.
Right.
We'd have been done because,
Yeah.
you know, I would have we'd have hired a copyright specialist. You know.
Well, that's me now.
Right.
If you have any copyright questions, we can answer them.
Yeah, is it pretty involved to get a copy?
Yeah, yeah, it is.
So you recommend steering clear of that? If you can-
Well, yeah, we learned. This first one that we're doing in our series is pretty much all, 90% of it is all copyrighted stuff that we have to get copyright for. Illustrations, museum pieces, things that were drawn for us, which is actually a little bit easier, but we had to sit down and find the books where we got the stuff out of and write to all those people, some of them in France and Switzerland, and pay whatever they needed to pay and wait for months while they got an answer, and, oh, we can't do this, you've got to contact somebody else, and, you know. So we learned, the next one, we're definitely going to either have things done for us.
Don't write to Van Morrison.
Who?
Who?
Van Morrison? Oh, really? Well, we actually have to do write
He
to
said
Mickey
no.
Hart, and I'm kind of hoping that he's a little bit easier. And we did the same thing with music, too. We had taken all our music off of discs and so forth, and now we have to get copyright permission for all of it. Whereas it would have been cheaper and easier for us as administrators on this film just to have somebody do it for us. And,
Original music.
Yeah.
And we did learn.
Wherever you can.
Unfortunately, we're stuck with
make
what we've
up your
got,
own.
but
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep. Laura, I'm actually surprised that you did that. You started producing this thing and you've used music
Mhm.
and then went and approached the song, the original holder of that
Right.
copyright, because I did that
Mhm.
in the script writing stage. And I contacted people like Van
Mhm.
Morrison, contacted Enya, and some people responded like, what's his name, Winston, and
George Winston.
responded almost immediately.
Right.
And I
Yeah,
didn't hear
that's the
from
case.
Van Morrison's company until like 3-4 months later,
Mhm.
and it was a flat no. We just don't
Hmm.
let it out at all. So it was just much easier
Yeah.
just to get someone else to write a script.
Well, we did have that problem. For example, we needed Walt Disney's Three Little Pigs, and it just made the pilot. We had to have it in there. If it wasn't for this piece, that we felt that the film would have flopped. And Bruce contacted Disney, and they said no. And he called them, and they said no. And he wrote again, they said no. We're nonprofit, we're this,
We got as
that,
far as
no.
maybe.
Yeah, right.
From
And
no,
then
no,
after
no,
that, it was
maybe.
still no. So then we were back to square one. We had to have this particular shot, but we couldn't use it from Disney. So we searched around. We tried to find other Three Little Pigs that was redone. Couldn't find it. Finally, we got it out of a book from Random House, which they had contacted us back and says, well, to make a long story short, probably that they'll let us use it. But it's not going to be nearly as good. And we still have some music pieces that we have to get copyright on too, and I have a feeling that might happen on a few music. So yeah, we should have done that in the very early stages, but like I says, we were kind of learning as we went. Neither Bruce and I had done this before with this intense copyright deals. And we figured it'd be really easy because we're nonprofit and our budget was fairly low, and you know, we're just in Missoula. Like, who are we? But it was very hard. We even had to pay as much as $1,500 for a minute of footage in one case. So, and
That's
they
from
wouldn't give us
Universal.
any slack. So,
And I
Don't
begged
do
this
that.
woman, she's
Yeah,
a
you
legal person.
did.
She was really nice. She's really nice. She's from England, and I'm explaining we're nonprofit, and this is for education. It's going to save the world.
then what?
And she goes, these these boys here, they wouldn't even cut their mothers a break. I knew to stop then. I wasn't going to get any farther.
And one other little tip too that I learned, when you ask for copyright permission, don't offer to pay them anything until they ask you for money. Because we had a form that was made up and there was a little line item that said what fee, if
Yeah.
applicable, in parentheses. And of course, all of them put down a fee until I caught on saying, well, wait a minute, what if I take this off? And then I did, nobody asked us after that to pay them. So that's a little word to the wise. So don't.
The other
don't
thing
offer
I
to
would,
pay.
you know, this is like, you shut off the camera, at least shut off the audio on this, that you can't quote me on this. But maybe kind of use some common sense and think, you know, what is it that you're doing here? And then decide. I mean, there's people, you know, Guerrilla Video out there will tell you just use it. And their motto is, it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. So,
Good motto.
anyway, take that for what it's worth.
Well, the curious thing is, to make it, you know, kind of funny story, the Van Morrison's company said, we absolutely do not allow his music in anything but his records. And I go to see this movie, and in fact, it was
Yeah, just,
Oh.
what was
just
it?
recently,
Just
and there's
recently.
Van Morrison on the soundtrack.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
jeez. Well, that's what
So-
Disney's told us, basically, that they don't do that. But you see Disney things on a lot of things.
Yeah.
And maybe we just are too small, I don't know. They just didn't know who now we were, but I don't know what happened.
Can you get it sort of secondhand, like show a TV playing that, as if that was just part of?
No.
No.
For something like we were doing, and ours is going on PBS, it will be
That's a good
distributed.
idea.
I like
So,
that.
no, we probably would have gotten into more trouble. Plus, it would look really bad too, because the quality wasn't nearly
Well,
as
no,
good,
you wouldn't
but-
use it, you'd sort of use it secondhand too, as if somebody was
Oh,
watching.
I
Yeah, like say you
see.
had kids
Oh,
watching.
sure.
this
in front of the
movie.
TV.
Like we did, could you see what's on the screen
No.
with the, oh.
'Cause we
That's a
didn't
good
have anything on
question.
the screen.
Oh, that's true.
Because it's out there for
Try
public
it.
I don't,
viewing.
yeah,
Yeah,
really.
that's right. It's easier to ask
I
forgiveness.
don't know, what do you think on that, Mary? Have you ever done that? I guess,
I
you
think
know, I've
that's
seen
probably a
people
good
here
idea, 'cause
do
there
that.
is the fair use stipulation where it.
Would
you know,
that fly with Rand?
That if it's, but I think that was for news
Yeah.
primarily, like
Yeah.
for 30-second
Yeah,
news
news.
bite or whatever.
News has a
so-
whole different set
I
of
would-
rules.
my-
Documentaries and news
Yeah,
have a whole
yeah.
different set
In
of
my
rules.
experience,
Well,
I mean,
don't
you know, the reputation Disney has is that
You
they
wouldn't,
would, if they
yeah.
found out, they'd get you. I mean,
Right.
they are really strict about that, probably
Mhm.
more strict than any
And especially on their
production
animation.
group I've
Yeah.
ever run
Mhm.
into. So,
There is stuff that's called public domain, however. I'm not sure what the length of time has to transpire before a movie goes into public domain.
75
Yeah,
years.
it's now 75 years, as
It
of
used to be what?
1940 something.
Must have been less
It
than
was
that before.
50, and they
It was
just
50,
upped
so,
it,
you know,
yeah.
there are old films that you can use. They're in the public domain. The copyrights are no longer applicable to them. And so you can do the same with
Photos
music.
and music. yeah.
Music is pre-72, but,
Is it?
yeah. But what we're talking about here almost is like words or a score. Like Peter and the Wolf, we can use Peter and the Wolf in our documentary, no problem, because that's pre-72. But because, let's say it's the New York Philharmonic
Mhm.
Orchestra's performance of Peter and the Wolf, you know, done in 1983, that now we're into a whole new ballgame. So then you got to ask permission of the, you know, New York Philharmonic for their performance, their rendition, you know, their translation of it.
Yeah, it's tough. Mm.
When you say just, it's easier to have musicians just do it, what do you mean? Do they invent their own, they write their own music?
Well, you help them.
Or-
That's why what I brought up earlier, you know, that the guy I was working with goes New Age geologic theme. That's his note to his musician, and there's some really talented people out there who you guys are probably into thinking visually. They think in music, so you give them New Age geologic theme, and all of a sudden they, hey, yeah, here's something that'll work in there, and what you do is you try to supply in your mind. You come up with as much as you can. You know, heavy, dramatic, music or light pastoral. You give them whatever words of description you can, and then they get in there on their synthesizer or whatever, and they put this together, and then run it by you, and you go, well, this sounds good.
You can give them a storyboard too, that might help.
Yeah.
If they can see the visuals, then maybe they can
Yeah.
apply it right to the board.
I wanted to come up and mention that too. We have a lot of musicians who've come into MCAT, and there's notices on the front board for voiceover work and musical work. We have folks who are interested in doing musical work on video productions.
And they're good. They're very
And
good.
we also have a music library here that's cleared for your use on productions. So when you're thinking, now to me, music is it. I mean, to Bruce, it's the script, right? But for me, working in production, I find that music is really critical to the mood, so it's all the layers that go into video production. I find the music is the very last thing that goes on, and it can kind of be the glue for your production, because it can tie in the visual threads, the script. It can tie in all the sound effects. All of a sudden don't just sound like, oh, where'd that water come from? If you have music that sounds a little bit watery, that runs through the effects, through the voice, through the visuals, it can really tie it together. So I'm just letting you know, we do have a music library, and we also have lots of musicians in Missoula who are willing to work on production.
You used,
Robert Hart.
right, on yours,
forget to
yeah.
repeat the
What, did he
questions,
pretty
yes.
much give you what you wanted?
I was real pleased with it.
He seems to be
Yeah.
real good, yeah. And what's
Just
nice
getting back-
is,
go ahead.
he does the production for you, so the copyright belongs to you. So whatever you pay him, I don't know what you paid Robert, but, most cases they'll take a small amount of money for MCAT productions. But then you have full rights to use that music however you need to in that production. And that's the difference of what we're battling with
Yes.
and what Roman had to.
The frustration, you eliminate a lot of frustration
Mhm.
about getting copyrights or copyrighted music from Van Morrison,
Mhm.
and working with a musician is another artist that,
Mhm.
in effect, enhances what you're producing,
Yeah.
and it's good for the economy of Missoula.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Instead of
Right.
paying
Sure.
$1,500
Sure.
to
Right.
whoever
Right.
probably doesn't need it.
What kind of money are you talking about?
Well, he charges, his rate was $10 per finished minute. But I sat in that room, even for the material that you have here at MCAT, and I listened to a lot of music for literally hours. And at that point, when I got really frustrated with everything, I showed him the almost completed tape. And I left for Christmas holiday, and I came back, and the thing was done.
Yeah.
And I went into editing number 2, and within like 3-4 hours, I had everything completed as far as the soundtrack.
Mhm.
So that's
Yeah,
the
he's
beauty of
good.
it, it's just, and he did it right to the tape.
Mhm.
So-
And $10 a minute?
That's
really
This
good.
is nothing. I mean,
He'd probably negotiate too, I would assume, because I think
better-
he's
better
done it for.
Take that back, excuse me.
Mhm.
What was it for, I think it was $20 for, yeah,
Oh.
10-minute tape, $200.
Mhm. And I know he's done it for one other producer. He worked something out with her, so. But we've got several really good people around here that would be able to help you out, I'm sure. I've got one actor who just came in who'll do voiceovers for you for just the cost of having a tape when you're done, so he can put it on his resume. So there are a lot of people that we have up here on our boards that will help you out in barter, if they have to barter with you. Because they want to get production done just as much as you do to help them out, so,
Yeah.
yeah. We can help you there.
But I like also what, I think it was you said about how those individuals think, those artists, we tend to look or, project things visually, and these folks just live, breathe, and eat music.
Yeah.
And man, it's just amazing. Like you said
fascinating.
earlier, you want to, some kind of new age, whatever, and they'll give it to you. They'll, make it sound like whatever you want it to sound.
Mhm. Yeah.
Make it look almost easy.
Yeah, yeah.
other questions?
I have a question I'll direct to
Mhm.
Lori.
Okay.
If you are limited to one camera, like what I have in mind is a production that I have coming up where it's a training session, so you're taping, and it's basically gonna be like talking heads.
Mhm.
What can you do to make that interesting, where you're limited to one camera?
Mhm. The question was, if you're limited to just one camera and you're doing a talking heads, what can you do to make that interview a little bit more interesting? I've done that. I've had to go out into the field with one camera and get an interview out on a farm. And basically what I told you before is he was talking about sustainable agriculture in this case, and he was talking about irrigation and fields and bugs and things like that. I came back and I logged my tape, I put down what he was talking about, and I went out a week or two later after I took my shot list of what he had talked about and what shots I can reasonably get, and I got some cutaways. And I inserted cutaways. Oh, well, I haven't started editing it, so I should say I have, but I will insert cutaways in some of those segments where he's talking about them.
Okay,
Is that-
here's what I have in mind. This is like a real bureaucratic, it's
Mhm.
Department of Corrections.
Mhm.
Is gonna
So it's
do-
dry?
It's gonna be dry, yeah. They're gonna do these training sessions
Mhm.
to try to show community groups how to link
Uh-huh.
up, and so it's gonna be a lot of talking.
Right.
And, you know,
Well, there's still a lot you could do with that. There was another one that I was asked to do about courtroom procedures, what to do in a courtroom, and I thought, God, that's really dry. And how could I do something like that? They're going to talk about legalities, how they can legally help senior citizens. And I thought, well, if they're going to talk about this, and you could do the same thing, go out and get community groups doing what they're talking about. For example, you've got to have some cutaways in there somewhere or somehow, even if it's a list of what they're talking about, something written, something to visually take somebody's eyes off of that talking head.
There's some.
Because boy, you'll lose your audience.
There's some other, just little while you're there, if you don't
Graphics.
have the luxury to go out and shoot everything they're talking about, you can never have too many cutaways. That's one thing
With the
I learned every
talking
time I
heads,
go
yeah.
out on a shoot. I learned that I still could have more cutaways, and the cutaways are just a change in the action. If let's say there's a quiet point in there where you can turn the camera around, shoot the audience. Get some tight shots of
Right,
the
at the
audience,
same-
get some wide shots of the audience. If you got another break in the action, move the camera to the back of the room and get a wide shot of the whole room. And play around, just get as much of that kind of
Yeah.
stuff as possible, and then insert those cutaways where you need them. There's going to be a few
You're gonna
places,
have
where
to,
you have an edit point, let's say, where somebody's talking, and then they stop for a while, and they start again. If you're going to edit those pieces back to back, it's going to look funny. It's called a jump cut. It's like I'm sitting here talking,
Right.
and I stop for a while, and then I start talking, you edit that. Well, the edit's going to be, my hand will be here, and in the next scene, it's down
Right,
here, and all of a
right,
sudden,
okay.
boop, like
So you're
that,
gonna
it's
have to do
gone.
something.
So you got to stick something in there to cover that. That's when you put in the reverse angle. That's when you put in the shot of the audience, or you put in the wide shot of the room, or graphics. Anything you can come up with. If people, there's character generators in there, CGs. They're the titling machines.
That's a good idea, yeah.
If somebody talks about a list of things to do, instead of their head just blah 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 blah, point number one, point number two, type it up on the screen, and pop those in there when they talk
Right.
about them. Anything to liven it up, because
Yeah.
I've done all kinds of shoots just like that, and they can be sleepers, and do what you can to bring them alive.
Usually, unless you're doing a production where there's a speaker to a large audience and you can't start and stop them, you can have your interviewer, whatever. You can have the person you're interviewing talk for a while and then say, okay, let's take a break, and then go ahead and get your cutaways or move your camera or whatever, that helps. But yeah, you're still going to need something other than that person in there, and do whatever you can to get it.
Okay,
So-
how about, what I did I've only ever done one production, but I do a lot of Zoom shots. Just
No,
for
that
something
wouldn't quite
different,
do it.
no?
It does help if you're going, okay, you have the shot, you have the close-up of the person, and then you have a cutaway, and then when you come back into that shot, it's a wide angle of that person. That does help a little bit, but still, you can't just have the person, in my opinion, I don't think it really helps visually to have that person and then zoom out, and then zoom in after a little bit, and then pan, with no other visuals in there. It's still pretty, you're still gonna lose your audience, I
I
think.
second that. I think.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter with camera.
I think that zooming, one or two in a production is fine, one in and one out. But if you do it too much, it's
It's gonna-
basically screaming out to the audience, hey, we don't
boring.
have anything else
Yeah.
to show you guys here.
Right, like
We don't have any cutaways, we don't have any other footage, so I'm gonna zoom out. And too many of them, after a while, you can almost make the audience kind of
Yeah.
rocking and reeling there.
Or even, shots of the room, just a nice, called an establishing shot, or you just, there's books on a shelf or something, and you just do a nice slow pan of the books, or something, you gotta have something.
Well, and you know what it is that they're gonna talk about?
Yeah, it's about youth prevention, and they're trying to get the community groups to all work together, so.
But, okay, but I mean, if you know that, this is, I wanna
It won't
plug
be
the
a script.
brainstorming
It won't be a
thing.
set script.
Okay.
It'll be.
No, but you know the
interactive.
subject matter.
Yeah.
And this is where you know some of the topics, if you,
Right.
draw your nice hot bath, submerge your head, and just get down there and start
Soak your
thinking.
head for a
Some-
while.
Yeah, just start brainstorming, or go into this room to begin with. What are things that are there? If they're talking about youth, I mean, would a playground shot, would kids going around on one of those whirly gigs, would that be good to just pop in there for a few seconds?
You'd be
Um,
surprised how much you can get if you really, really need to.
And that's where you have fun too, and and then just the flood of things that'll come into your mind. It's some, most of them you're not going to use, but if you came up with 3 things, that's 3 things of what you were ahead of when you started.
Yeah, because there's a lot of dry productions out there that have some very, very good information. If you can get the audience to sit there and listen to it, if there's nothing else to watch. And,
And keep in mind too, you don't always have to be literal. I mean, this is,
Right.
you've heard about symbolism. I mean, you can be showing something else, and this brings
Yeah,
something
you can
to
use
the
graphics
audience's
or-
mind. Make sure it applies, though. You don't want to picture a Hoover Dam up there, and you go, where did that come from?
know. I don't know.
What the heck? Well, maybe that's the one you want. I don't know.
yeah, that's a good question. But it can be done with one camera very easily.
So you're doing something for PBS?
Yeah, that's the one that Bruce and I are working on. It's called Animals of the Mind. It's a series on animals and mythology and culture and how they treat these animals. It's going to be run regionally on PBS and hopefully nationally.
Does it pay you to do it?
No.
That's-
Oh, we don't get
Documentaries
paid. Are
don't
you
pay.
kidding?
You don't. You're not gonna make money on documentaries, but again, what in establishing credibility to be able to at least make a living. Doing
What
this.
if it was on a commercial TV though, like Discovery or something
They,
like that?
Some of those
it wouldn't make money there either because they'd probably pay you $10,000, to run it, which is just nothing.
Do you apply for grants?
Right.
Oh, gosh,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
We raised quite a bit of money.
Do you want to talk about grant writing?
If you want to, that's
Sure.
a whole
I'd
different
be interested.
ballgame, but what would you like to know? Yeah.
I asked one more production question. I'm just really getting into this, so I don't know much about
Okay.
it, but how much would you estimate, say, for a 15-minute length production and a 5-minute length production? How much time would it take for the shooting and the pre-production time and the editing?
Okay. The question was how much time in pre-production, editing, and shooting for like a 5-minute film, a 10-minute, a 15-minute? People ask me that all the time, and I don't know the answer. All I know is whatever I estimate, it takes double. I did a
Is that
30-second
Yeah.
PSA once. It took me 9 hours just to edit, and that was, maybe 2 days to shoot. So that was a lot for a 30-second PSA. I've done 15 minutes that have only taken me a couple days. So I can't answer that because I never know what to tell people. They ask me how much my time is going to be, how much I'm going to put into it, and it's really, really hard.
You did say 90% that goes into
It's
pre-production of the time.
paperwork, I think, yeah.
The pre-production
Yeah.
is where you figure that
Mhm.
stuff out.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what's great about pre-production, is
Mhm.
you can sit down and you do the shot lists and all that sort of thing, and then you can start to estimate, well, I'm gonna be shooting down in I need shots of Yellowstone, let's say. So it's gonna be a day down, a half-day drive down there. I'm gonna need these shots, I can get them and then drive back. So when you've got all your pre-production done, then you can at least start to estimate
Yeah.
what
And
it's
then
gonna
double
cost
it.
how much time it's gonna take to shoot it.
And this is
It's
the tough part,
tough.
because you can actually have an idea, general idea
Mhm.
of what this video is gonna be about, but a client wants to know what this is gonna cost them before you finalize it.
Mhm.
And you don't wanna put in 200 hours of pre-production, writing, and all that, and then know exactly how long it's gonna take you,
Mhm.
what shots you want. You come in there the first week after they ask you for the project estimate, and you say, I think this is what it's gonna take me.
Mhm.
And this is what happened to me here recently, and you get into
Yeah.
it, and then you write the script, and you finalize it, and you rewrite it and rewrite it, then you have a committee that tells you, we want this specific thing and that specific thing, and you rewrite it the sixth time, and all of a sudden, your X number of hours has quadrupled, if not
Mhm.
more.
But I like
And-
Bruce's idea of the sign-off.
Yeah,
You know, and
me too.
I was doing a lot of
Yeah, that's a
work
good
for the
idea.
Forest Service towards the end of my Sterling Productions career, and that would happen all the time.
Yeah.
There were,
Mhm.
it was committee after committee after committee.
And everybody
And so
has
what
ideas.
I started to do, when I finally learned after I'd gone in to do the seventh re-edit, because gee, maybe we ought to change that line there, is I'd go in with a script and I'd have them sign off on it. I say, okay, are you sure this is what you want to say? Because this is what we're going to do. If you want it changed after the fact, it's going to cost you. If we have to go back into post-production because you want to change lines in this script that have been approved already, then sure, we'd be glad to do it. It'll be $75 an hour or something like that.
In effect, that's what happened with me. We had to renegotiate the original contract because they were asking for quite a bit. But to give you an idea of as far as, I don't know about pre-production, but I kept very accurate at time of the shooting and the editing. And out of 300 hours of, I kept fairly close on that. 50 of it, 45 hours was shooting, the rest was in logging and editing and doing the soundtrack, listening to the music to see what I wanted. So, I don't know, and it varies.
Yeah. So to
You
answer
gotta
your
think-
question, I don't know if we can.
Well, part of it too
It's-
depends
No.
you have to decide
Goes for a 10-minute
how
video.
much are you gonna sweat this thing? I mean, how much quality are you wanting to have?
Right.
I was in on shooting Philip Aggie, the ex-CIA guy, when he was here, and I was doing this because I thought it'd be good for people to hear this, over MCAT, and we could have done a bang-up job with this if we wanted to, but I didn't have the time to do it. I had the time to go shoot, and I had time to edit, the episode 1, and I was just, it was totally mechanical.
That's true, you guys did crank that out pretty
Yeah.
fast.
And so, we could have gone and got cutaways of, some documentary picture, photograph or something, and all that. But I decided right off the bat that I wasn't going to spend the time on it. I just didn't have the time to spend. So, there's one that really went fast.
That's a good point,
But
yeah.
then, the wolf one that we're doing, we're being very meticulous with this because we're looking at this as being like a show card. And then there's places in between. There's the whole realm in between, and so part of that you got to decide how deep in do you want to get.
Yeah, so some are obviously going to be more complicated. If you are doing a conference where it's just one person talking and you have 2 cameras and one camera's getting the whole conference, the whole interview or whatever, workshop, and the other one's getting the cutaways, basically you have just a couple edits. You have your one whole speech right there, and then you stick your cutaways in it, and you're done, and your titles and your credits. So it really depends on how complicated it is. But God, it could be a lot of work.
You do finally get to that point where you say, I don't care.
Yeah.
It's 3 o'clock in the morning, I don't care.
Well, that's the time
You know?
to stop.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
when you
Come
start
back
getting
in fresh.
Yeah, when you start getting to the
Yeah.
point where,
You
I mean,
don't
especially if this is
leave.
important to you, if it's
Mhm.
really important. If it's Philip Aggie and Bruce is there cranking away, then I'll go the extra hour because I don't care. But if it's the Wolf Reel or Imagine, and I start getting to the point where I think I'll let this go, then it's time for me to go home and read a book.
That's a real tough one too, because you get obsessive with this. That medium is
Oh,
one of the
yeah.
most obsessive things. I mean, they talk about heroin and crack and all this stuff.
Yeah, that's
that
true.
place is deadly.
It is.
And
It
you
is
get
very-
into it, and it's like you're totally into it. You don't eat, you don't kiss your kids hello, goodbye. You're just in there. And then it really helps to, you don't see it clearly, and it really helps to walk away from it for a while.
Yeah.
It really does, even a day.
Roma would be in here at 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. every single morning for a month. I don't know how long it was, but it was a long time. Yeah, so.
And then you come over to the person, you hand them this little cassette, your whole life is
Really?
in this little box.
And
And
it's
they
their
have no
master.
idea. They have no idea what energy and effort that took,
No,
they
we
just go,
have an
"Oh,
idea.
geez."
And
We
they
do,
go,
I don't know if anybody
"Oh,
else
nice."
does.
Yeah.
Did you do that over the weekend?
You know what they say is, well, now that last scene, I think we want to rephrase that.
Yeah.
Now, what would you guys say, as far, in estimating again, what would you say on editing time?
For what? How long?
Like, I'm talking about a ratio, like, say,
Shooting to editing?
yeah, a minute of production for 5 hours of work. Like, what I've been finding with the Wolf Reel or Imagine was for laying down narrative and image. Okay, this doesn't count sound effects, and it doesn't count music. Narrative and image, if I was getting 30 seconds an hour, I felt like I was moving. I was cruising.
Literally.
That was good.
I'd say about 2 hours to like 30 seconds. That was my experience with that.
Yeah,
My,
that's a good
my
one.
formula is 3 hours per finished minute in editing alone. 1 hour of review and log, 1 hour of rough cut editing, and 1 hour of master edit. And that's if everything's pretty efficient, if you kind of know what's going on. That's just for editing, so I don't know what, I have never, shooting varies so much. It depends on if it's a performance, it's a one-time event, you can go in, it's just really different, or if it's the kind of thing Joan's talking about where you're shooting something, then going back and doing cutaways. Shooting really varies, I think. If it's a documentary, they say 20 to 1, you shoot 20 times as much material as you use in editing finally in a documentary. That's another figure that's thrown out.
Yeah, I guess
This,
I have
this
heard
project's
that.
really given me a different appreciation of people like Pete Talbot, who, when I was actually paying, per second, like 30-second spots, and he'd say, well, let's see, 30 seconds is gonna cost you so many thousands of dollars, and I would say, what? And now it's like, man.
People don't realize the work.
You're worth every penny. Here, take some more.
Yeah.
What was yours on?
What's that?
What is it on?
Oh, it's
You-
for the folks upstairs, Partners at Home Care.
Yeah, it's very good.
Yeah.
Are you gonna show it at the next producers workshop? Good.
sure.
Good.
Other questions about MCAT productions? I don't want to stay on paid productions
Mhm,
so
yeah, good.
much, because I think that's only probably 10% really of what we do.
Well, I was just gonna, what's the best way to put the slideshow on video? I mean,
Can you-
effective, not just a slideshow, but
Can you repeat the
Yeah.
question?
How do you transfer slides to videotape?
to make a video, not just to make it a slideshow on video, but
Had a lot
I've
of
never,
feedback.
ever in my life been happy with the transfers I've gotten from slides to video. You can take the simple route where you project it up on a white screen, and you have your camera there next to it, the room's dark, and you're recording it right off of a screen. That's the simplest way, and it's also the one that gives you probably the lowest quality. Up from that a step is what they call a telescene or a film chain, where they're actually projecting into a little mirrored chamber, and then you've got your video camera on the other side recording off of that, and that's brings it up a step more.
Can there be camera movement in there?
Not much.
It's
I mean,
just a
you're
static
right
picture,
there. Maybe
yeah.
some zooms and stuff. At least when you have the screen, you can zoom and pan and so forth. But if it's a real critical thing, you can send it off to like Seattle or Denver, where they have these things called flying spot scanners, which the camera will actually scan each line. You've got the lines on the TV. It'll scan your slide, each line per line, and then digitalize it and put it back up here. And the reason you do that is because the chip cameras are better, but video has a hard time handling contrast, high contrast, dark areas, light areas. And that's why when you project it on the wall and you shoot it with your video camera, things kind of get mushy. They kind of, if it's a real bright shot, everything kind of blooms. If it's dark, it's, you know, and if it's a high contrast shot where you've got like some dark on the left and some hot, bright stuff on the right, you have all kinds of problems. You either get really hot or black, you know. And I guess one thing is go to manual iris. You know, on the cameras you can either have an automatic iris, which the camera kind of samples the whole picture and says, well, this is a pretty good medium f-stop here. This is about as much light as we should let in to the chips behind the lens. I'd say switch it over to the manual, and then at least you can play around and you can key on the areas, the most important area on that slide that needs to be rendered is, you know, you can kind of change your f-stop on the camera to make sure that that's clear and the unimportant information isn't quite as clear a shot. I actually find that still photos work better than slides. Right? And it's because you don't have that high a contrast as you do with the slides, where you're projecting a light through it, and so you've got really bright areas and dark areas and so forth. So correct me if I'm wrong. Let me know what your experiences are in these. But I've had better luck shooting still photos than I do slides, unless you send the slide off to Seattle and pay $350 an hour for them to go through and scan your slides.
For our purposes here, we have a lot of people shoot slideshows in the studio here, and I've done it. They've come out okay, like Pete says, not great. The colors tend to change; they tend to be a little bit yellowish. But we will try to adjust the white balance and so forth in the back and the iris to get it what you want. I had one group come in that wanted to do a slide presentation showing the person giving the presentation standing there and talking about the slides, which was impossible, of course, because you've got to turn the lights out. So they were real happy with that, so they shot the slides. Well, the guy was talking, then went back and got some cutaways of him standing there. So it didn't work very well, so if that's what you want, it doesn't work. But as far as for our purposes here, it works just fine. I mean, like it says, it's not professional, but it works okay. And you can do some movements, some pans and tilts and zooms and so forth.
I guess
If you did it
what
right.
bothers me is because slides
The
are
colors
so
off.
pretty, you know,
Right.
basically a
And they
projected
don't.
35 millimeter slide is so rich,
Right.
then you just lose it.
Yeah,
I mean,
you
it's
really do, but-
it's adequate, I'm sure,
Mhm, sure.
for most
Yeah.
projects. People know what it is
Right.
up there. It's just kind of, I guess,
Right.
again, a personal thing. It's you're taking a really beautiful image and reducing it to a kind of
Yeah.
mediocre.
it's
But bear in
money.
mind, your image is going on television, and there's only so much definition you can have up there anyway.
True.
So,
Yeah.
you know, there's no way you can ever convey a 35 millimeter.
Till we get to high definition TV.
Yeah. But the advantage here of projecting it as opposed to what is the other process where it goes onto
The
main-
telescene or
Yeah.
film islands or film TV
You can do
stations
that
have
here
it.
in Missoula. There's places that'll do
No.
this
Is
for you.
there?
Yeah.
The TV
To-
stations?
Yeah, you know, but
Anyway, but the advantage of just projecting it yourself is when you can do it yourself, and the other is that you can roam around on it, so you don't look like you're doing a slideshow.
keep in mind aspect ratios too. By that I mean,
Different.
you got your tall, thin pictures and slides, and then
Yeah.
the horizontal
Right.
slides. You got vertical and horizontals. And a vertical slide, of course, you're going to have to do a move on. You're going to have to tilt up and down if you want to show the whole thing. Horizontal is actually pretty close to the TV.
It's not too bad. You lose a little
So
bit.
you lose a little on the
Mhm.
sides.
Yeah.
Crop a little bit on the sides. But you good? It was another question?
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, just what is the difference between shooting a video of a slide on the screen and shooting the same scene outside?
Live.
Yeah. And you're saying that the video camera doesn't deal with contrast well.
Mm-hmm. As opposed to, a live.
Yeah.
Let's
Just
do
was the
depth
same
and
scene,
lighting
Same
and-
lighting
Yeah.
outside.
I think your contrasts are subtler outside.
Transparency film only holds a couple stops of light and dark. I mean, it just by itself narrows it, or puts them off.
Well, and the other difference is, I mean, outside you're dealing with real light. I mean, and then a slide you're dealing with artificial light that's being projected through a tube, and
On a flat screen.
yeah. And the other, we have a scene where we need an Earthrise picture, kind of like thing, and it's just like we haven't been able to find it in terms of the real moving footage easily.
One
So-
of those hard to get shots.
Yeah, we decided we couldn't do a location shoot. So we have a picture, from a book, and even there with the way we move the camera, I think we're kind of a little bit clever, and it looks a little bit real, but still, a static shot that doesn't move. There's something about it that even if you're shooting a building, there's something about that being a picture that somehow comes through to your eye and says that. Whereas if you're videoing that building, something tells your eye that this is a real shot of this, versus I'm shooting a photograph of it.
Yeah, I think it has to do with the depth and the shadows and, just,
It's a good question, though.
Yeah, it really is a good question.
Because it's true, you go out and you could match the same frame outside the video camera, it's gonna look a heck of a lot nicer. And it must be, I guess you start losing things in generations, as we say, you've
Sure,
already,
that would be
you've
it,
already
too.
copied this image once on film, and so now you're doing it again, and the more times you copy the original, it degrades further and further down.
I've never thought of it that way. But I do use a fair amount of slides in some of my MCAT things.
I may be being particularly harsh too, because lots of people do it and they're perfectly happy with the results. I never have been, but it's.
Well, there is a big difference. The
Well, again, it
colors
gets
are
down
always
to what is it, what are you trying to do here? What is your purpose? And for most of what we're doing here, we want to get a message across. And try to be as creative as you can. But if that picture just can't be gotten anywhere, if it's a picture, the story is about, the life and times of your grandma, who was a real colorful person, and grandma's dead now, and you're talking about her when she's 20, it's a lot more interesting. Of course, you're not going to have slides of that, but let's say there is a photo of it. It's a lot more interesting to have a cutaway to a photo of grandma at 20 than to take your word for it to say that, she dressed in buckskins and drank with the best of them. It's a lot better if there's a picture there of grandma chugging away.
Or you could do a recreation.
That's true.
Now, what were you going to, remember the question?
Oh, you
long
wanted to
ago?
talk about grants, Roman?
Oh, well,
gosh,
let's not
because that's a
talk about that.
whole different
No.
ballgame. Just so happens I
We'll
got
have
one here.
we'll have
that
a
I can-
workshop on that
Oh,
later on.
yeah, that's
That is
a
a workshop in
whole
different-
itself, probably, isn't it?
That one and audio.
Right, yeah.
Well, audio, now, Mary,
Do have-
correct me, you had Rick Kushel in last year, right?
Right.
That-
That would be a good one to have again.
He's good to have. There is
Yeah.
a fellow here in town who is probably the best audio person in the state. The name of his company is the Recording Center. And it's right over here on Pine, kind of across from the Oxford. And if you ever have any serious questions on audio, he's the one to talk to. He can get a little technical at times when he starts talking about dB knee ranges and dynamic reverb and stuff like that. But he does know his stuff.
And he just had Hoyt Axton in there in his studio. He was very proud of that. He
Yeah.
just recorded Hoyt.
I'd be happy to find out what those blue little knobs do in edit number 2.
Yeah, really.
Or the green, the one on the
Yeah.
bottom.
Mid-range
You
and.
walk in there and say, you do not touch these.
Yeah, that's all you need to know, right?
That's right. That's all we're saying for now. I want to talk a little bit about audio, though. A couple things. I don't know if you all touched on this yet before we finish up. if you can use the same microphone all the way through your production, that will serve you well. If you're doing a couple different interviews or performances or whatever it might be, you know, we have some choices of some mic, whether it's if you're going to lapel mic all your interviewees, or are you going to use something like this omnidirectional that we're using tonight. But anyway, if you can use consistency in that, it will help you in your editing process, because mixing audio is more than I know about. I know how to adjust levels, and I know you can make it sound a little bit different by doing a few little things, but really you're going to be better off if you, in your original recordings, get consistent audio. And that has been something that's shown up in our MCAT productions that have been a problem, is that people record with this microphone and then they use a lavalier sometimes, and then they use the camera mic sometimes. And there's no way, the rule of thumb is there's no way to improve your original recording in the editing process. In other words, we can't change the quality of the picture, and we can't change the quality of the original audio recording. We can make adjustments to it, but we cannot change the overall quality of it. So a few things like that, once those are like tricks of the trade. So next time you do a production, you learn, you say, I've been using this kind of mic. Can I use this kind of mic again? If you ask us that, we can't keep track on every production what kind of mic you've been using, but if you start to pay attention to it, we can fill your request here for that kind of thing.
Do the individual tape recorders have, VTRs have a little bit different recording sound? Or?
The Portapacks, the more advanced Portapacks 3 and 4 have different types of microphones than the camcorders have. The camcorders have Electro Voice microphones, and on Portapacks 1 and 2, Portapacks 3 and 4 have these Shure microphones.
I'm not familiar with your equipment, but just sort of in general, you just try to keep
I would say to
signing up the
answer
same one.
your question of whether deck, going from deck to deck,
Yeah.
there is a difference in audio. There shouldn't be if they're similar decks. I mean, if this is a JVC 5600 3/4 inch deck, all JVC 3/4 inch, 5600 3/4 inch decks should record audio pretty darn much the same.
And check the settings.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's another thing. Lots of times you'll have a lot of equipment, both visually and in the audio, will have an auto and a manual. And I guess when in doubt, go to the auto mode. But if you've got the luxury to be able to control what you're doing, then go to the manual. If you're out in the field, and if you're chasing you're in a car chase or something like that, and you got to do it right there, switch to auto, and you'll get what you need. But if you've got the luxury to actually monitor the audio and make sure that your VU meters, the little meters on there, aren't buried in the red, then that's a nice way to go. If you've got a friend who can kind of monitor it while you're out there in the field, that's the same with the visuals on that too. Go auto if you have to, but if you've got the luxury to go manual, I suggest it.
One of the things I want to bring up again about music, because to me, how old is Anna? 12,
She's
13?
13 now.
This to me is just such an inspiring story. This girl, and she won an award at the International Wildlife Film Festival last year. And she did a little production on whale viewing, right? And Lori worked a lot with her and helped her through this, and then they got to the point now of music, okay? And Anna started listening to music, and finally she just says, I'm going to make up my own. And she did. Now, not all of us know how to play an instrument, but so what I want to get across to you is, make this project fun, too, okay? Have a good time with it, and ask your friends. Would you be interested in doing some music for this? And chances are they might. And if you do, if you know how to play an instrument, go ahead and have at it. You don't need to be, we were talking about, I'll go talk to this musician and this musician and all this. Talk to your friends or do it yourself. Have a good time.
Or make noises with your faces. Somebody did that too. With their body parts.
I've had good luck using friends, great luck using friends.
Mm-hmm.
Just for the purposes of videotaping tonight, I'm going to go ahead and shut down the camera. So I just want to thank you officially for coming, and it was real great and informative, and we want to run this on MCAT, needless to say. And I would like you all feel free to stay and just, come up and ask questions of the individuals here, or just keep going for a little while, but I want to thank you for coming too.
Look through
Look at
your
forms.
bag.
Yeah, sure. Could I get those forms
Yeah, we
back? The
need
only
all
reason I
of
say that is because some of them are my masters, my
Yeah, that's- that
originals,
looks
and I
like a
use them
master.
for copies. And I have to run here in just a minute because I'm in this glamorous world of video production. I get to drive to commercial video production. I get to drive to Terry, Montana for a shoot tomorrow. So, lot of glamour and excitement. Terry, east of Miles City.
You don't want to tell them the Ted and Jane glamour story?
No, I think we won't talk about it. We won't talk about that one.
Why not?
Pete does a lot of glamorous things.
Yeah. I've sold out, so I get, it's funny, because now that Montana's getting hip, we get all kinds of weird people up here wanting to produce things. And so we get like hard copy and current affair and Inside Edition and all those
And a French
really
crew.
high-end journalism.
Getting gum in the smut.
Yeah.